Welcome, Soundies, to our Sound for Video session. Today is the 24th of April, 2022. So glad you could join us today and hope you've had a good week. And let's jump into our agenda, see what we've got going for today. First up, our signal chain to this week is the same as last week, I think, for the most part. Except no, it's not. We used the Volt last week. So this week we have the Earthworks Ethos that is routed to the Shelford channel, the Rupert Neve Designs. That's going line level into Canon C200. That combines it with the video, sends it HDMI to the A10 Mini Extreme, and then that goes HDMI into a cross converter, a decimator, and that takes it SDI into the Epiphan Pearl 2 encoder, which is sending it to YouTube. We also have, we'll come to this a little later, we also have the Zoom F8N Pro set up, and that will, when Danny talks, that'll be her mic. That is then routed from the unbalanced line output into the A10 Mini. So that's our signal chain for today. That's what you're hearing. All right, coming up, we have our Dialogue Edit Mix Master Challenge on May the 1st. So that's next Sunday, 1 week from today. I hope you're as excited about this as I am. Let me tell you a little bit about it. What is it? It is an opportunity to have an esteemed panel of sound production and post-production professionals listen to and advise on your dialogue audio track. So recording that you make and any post-processing that you do on that as well. Of course, that happens next week on May the 1st. So why and for whom? It's for anyone who wants to have experienced audio professionals lend their finely tuned ears to your dialogue editing efforts. And our panel consists of Austin Kendrick, Mike Delgadio. Austin, by the way, is a dialogue editor for Nickelodeon. Mike is a professional voiceover artist. Alan Williams is a professional boom operator. And then this guy down at the bottom is me. That's the guy that just likes microphones a whole lot and is a corporate video producer. All right, so how to enter? Let's cover the details here. So again, the deadline is this Wednesday, the 27th by midnight U.S. Pacific time. You should send your entry to Curtis at learnlightandsound.com. And what you want to submit is, first of all, a clip that's no more than 60 seconds in length. And it would be really great if you could list the original audio gear that you used to record it. So the microphone, the audio interface, or the recorder, or whatever it was that you used to record it. List the processing that you apply in post, so any compression, EQ, noise reduction, de-essing, so on and so forth, anything you do in the post. That'll just be helpful for the panelists to have a little bit more context in terms of what you've done so far and can comment on that. You can include, and I actually would recommend including a sample, at least portion of that 60 seconds is a sample of what this audio sounded like before you post-processed it, and then the rest would be what you post-processed. I think that could be really helpful for people to be able to hear that. Again, you don't have to do that, but would be helpful. Please don't include any sort of music. There's just lots of copyright issues, and it would make it difficult to have the stream actually stay up on YouTube if somebody submitted something with music. And you also must have copyright permission and agree for it to play on the show. So it just needs to be something that you have the copyright for and that you're okay with us playing it on the show. Of course, it should be in .wav file format. So you can choose the sample rate. I'd recommend 48 kilohertz since we're doing video here, but that's up to you. All right, I think. Just a couple more notes here. We do expect this, of course, to be a popular challenge. We'll select 3 to 5 samples for the panelists to comment on during the show. Don't worry, if yours isn't selected, we will definitely come back to it. We might even, in fact, do another one of these where we bring on panelists. If not, then we'll have another one where I'll comment on what you submitted there. Also, those chosen will receive a special gift from the event's co-sponsor, which is Waves. If you've heard of Waves plugins, most likely. They will be providing a Clarity VX noise reduction plugin to each of those that are featured here on the show. So that's the background. If you have any questions, go ahead and pop those in the chat, and we'll come back to those a little bit later and cover those then. Okay. All right, let's go back to back to our agenda here. I'm going to have to quickly shoot back up. We are going to talk about audio routing for field mixers and recorders. And the context for this discussion today, we're actually going to be doing it on a Zoom F8N Pro. We'll show some things also on a Sound Devices MixPre 10. Of course, all of the higher end mixer recorders will also have these capabilities. And in fact, they'll have more capabilities than what we're going to show here today. But the context for this is that I received a question from somebody saying, hey, if I'm for the first time going to have a boom operator and I'm going to be operating the sound recorder mixer, how do I send that person, or what do I do in terms of routing setup to send that person to be able to talk to them on my Slate mic? So if I need to send them some message like, hey, could you please go check so-and-so's lavalier batteries? The wireless pack seems to be cutting in and out. Or I'm getting clothing rustle on one of the actors, please check that out. That's basically what a comm setup is, and we are going to talk about how you would actually set that up on a Zoom F8N Pro. The same concept applies to any other mixer that's capable of doing the same thing. So I just wanted to give that as a background. Once we're done with that, we'll come back. We have some questions that were submitted ahead of time, and then we'll go to the chat and answer any questions that come in there. So with that, let's go to our overhead camera here. Here we have our Zoom F8 and we have our MixPre. We'll come back to the MixPre. Actually, that's one of the questions that's coming up a little bit later. So I'm going to set that down here for now. On the Zoom F8, so again, what we're trying to do here, what we're trying to accomplish is if I'm operating the F8N Pro and I've got a boom operator that's up on set, I'm somewhere back in Video Village away from the set just a little bit. How do I set this up? So let's assume that first of all, you're using some sort of IFB transmitter. So you're using one of the outputs on the F8N Pro to send the feed to the boom operator. And you're going to want to choose exactly what you send to the boom operator. So what we can do here is a couple of things. So what I want to do is set up the Slate mic first. So there is a Slate mic here. You'll notice here on the switch on the front here, it's kind of faint, but you can see there's a little microphone. And what that does is if I move this to the left, I can talk into the microphone here. Whoops. I can talk into a microphone and it sends it right now, at least, to all the channels. So I can just then turn that off. And the reason they call it a Slate mic is it's usually something you would use at the start of a take or maybe at the end of a take. If you need to make some sort of note in the audio recording itself, it allows you to do that. So you can say, if there's something special about that particular take, you can say something there. So you might use it, for example, if a director calls out before you've actually cut the clip, you could actually record on there and say, director circle take, or something like that, meaning that's the one that the director really, really liked. Or if there was an overhead, an airplane that flew by that it's tainted the audio, those are the kind of things that you can use a Slate mic to record. But you can also use it in many cases to send information or to convey something to your boom operator. So how would we do that? If we come into the menus here and we come down, there is actually a Slate menu. And in the Slate menu, we're going to go ahead and look at Slate mic. You can set the level first of all, but you can also choose the routing. And right now you can see the Slate mic is sent to all of these channels. It's sent to 1 through 8, all of the inputs, plus it's sent to the left and right mix, plus it's sent to the main left and right output and the sub left and right output. So it's going everywhere. Now, if you only wanted it to go some places, you could set that up as well. So you might, for example, if you're working on a bigger production where you're recording isolated channels for each of the inputs, and that's most likely what the post team is going to use, you could also record your slate to one of the mixed channels, the left or right, or maybe both, whatever you want. But you could start here by just clearing everything and saying, okay, I don't want to send it anywhere, but let's go ahead and now choose where I do want to send it. Let's say I don't want to send it to any of the individual tracks, but I do want to send it to the left and right mix. And let's say, for example, I'm using the sub out to send a wireless transmission, a feed of the audio from the mixer to my boom operator. So then I would go ahead and select those outputs as well. So now when I activate that Slate mic, the only places it's going to be recorded is on the left and right mix, plus to the sub 1 and sub 2 outputs based on how we have things set up right now. Okay, so if you have a separate feed, for example, out of one of the main outputs going to, say, for example, a director or a script supervisor or someone else on set, they're not going to get whatever you say into the Slate mic. And that might be what you want. A lot of times you don't want all the noise of the audio department. going to the other people that are wearing headphones during the recording, or going to the recorded tracks to, when to the recorded tracks so that the post team gets them. So you might just want to contain that maybe on the left and right mix, for example, or maybe not. Maybe the left and right mix is something that's going to be used very specially, and maybe what you do instead, if you just want to put it on a scratch track, maybe you want a clean left and right mix. So let's say you have microphones on inputs 1 through 4 for this particular scene. I could also send the slate mic and I could enable input number 8, and that could be just slate notes and things like that in terms of the recording. So that's another option for how you can get that information to the post team without messing up or soloing any of the tracks that you need, or that they're going to need for the final mix. So this is just an example of what you're doing. So I think the most important thing to remember when it comes to routing, all routing is, it's like plumbing, really. You're just connecting things. You're telling the mixer where to send the audio, all the different places you want to send the audio. And it's like connecting a bunch of pipes together to send the audio to where you want it to go. So in this case, that slate mic, the input is the slate mic, and the output, or the destination, is any of these individual channels. Okay. So hopefully that answers the question. Now, if I wanted to, let's see, can I enable all of them again? I have to actually go back. Oh no, there we go. We can go ahead and enable all of them again. So if I want to quickly get all of them re-enabled and send the slate mic to everything, maybe in some cases you do want to do that, you can do that here as well. So that's another option. Now, while we're on the topic, let's pop back out of the slate menu and let's go back out to our outputs. Remember, we're sending audio to our boom operator, and so we want to make sure that we set things up so that the boom operator has the right audio that they need to hear. And this can change depending on what you're doing, and it depends on the preferences of the boom operator, preferences of the mixer. But first of all, you have to make sure your outputs are on, the ones that you're going to be sending audio to. The boom operator, you need to make sure that output is on. So I'm going to say in this case it's going to be sub out 1 and 2. That's the 3.5 millimeter output you see on the side here that has this cable plugged into it right now. All right, now we're going to do our routing. So I'm going to come into the sub out routing. Now, this is where I can define what the boom operator is going to hear on that 3.5 millimeter output. And you might wonder, well, what would a boom operator want to hear? I think that there are a number of things that they'd want to hear, but it depends on the boom operator and how they like to work. I personally like to hear just the boom mic, but sometimes that's not practical. If you're booming and mixing yourself, you might need to actually have the lavs in there as well. So let's just assume initially that the boom operator wants to hear just the boom mic, and the boom mic is going to be on input number 1. So we have 2 rows of indicators here. Across the top, we have all of the channels that you can route. So inputs 1 through 8 plus the left and right mix channels. On the top row, that's what's going to go to sub out 1, which is the left channel on the sub output, and sub 2 is the right output on the 3.5 millimeter output. So we have a couple of choices. We can send for each of those inputs or mix tracks. Right now, it's just sending the left mix out on sub 1 and the right mix out on sub 2. So it's just going to send the left mix in the left ear, the right mix into the right ear of the boom operator. That's what the boom op would get right now if you're sending a stereo feed. Okay, now we also have something you can see down at the bottom. It indicates you can have nothing. You can send nothing. That's what we're sending right now to each of these channels except for the left and right mix. You can send a pre-fader signal or you can send a post-fader signal. All right, so when would you want each? If I were sending this to my boom operator, I'd probably want to send a pre-fader level of the boom mic into their left channel. So I'm going to go ahead and choose this one as pre-fader on the left and pre-fader on the right. So now the boom operator is going to get the boom mic in the left ear and the right ear, and it's not going to be affected by any fader settings that I'm making here. So if I'm trying to actively adjust the faders here and make a nice mix, I might at some point need to pull the boom down just a little bit in that mix, but if it's isolated, it doesn't necessarily make sense to pull that level down. So since I'm sending just an isolated feed of the boom mic into the left and right ears, I'm going to go ahead and send it pre-fader to my boom operator. So in this case, again, boom operator gets nothing but the boom mic in their left and right ears. Okay, so now what if I wanted to do something more sophisticated? What if the boom operator wanted, in addition to that, a pre-fader mix of the first 3 lavalier microphones? We could do that as well. So let's say I have lavalier microphones on channels 2, 3, and 4. And in this case, the boom operator might just want to have those in their right ear, not in their left ear. They want to be able to focus on the boom mic in their left ear. But if they do need to listen to the lavalier mics, they could listen to those in the left ear. And in fact, if we do that, we might also want to go ahead and turn off the boom mic in the right ear. So now what they would be hearing based on these settings is they would hear the boom microphone pre-fader in their left ear and the 3 lavalier microphones in their right ear, again, pre-fader. So any of the fader changes that I make won't affect what the boom operator is hearing in their ears. Now, if I wanted to, if I was doing some mixing here, I might want to send the lavaliers post-fader. I can do that as well. So if I want the boom operator to hear what the lav mics sound like after I have mixed them, after I've changed the faders and adjusted things a little bit, that's what they'll get in their right ear at this point. So hopefully that gives you some context to when and why you might want to use some of these things, and you know, kind of the flexibility that you have on the F8N Pro. You also have most of this available on the MixPre as well. Although I will say on the MixPre, what was a little bit disappointing to me, and I'll show you here, is there is no way to, I didn't find a way at least, to individually route the slate mic. So if I come in here, I can certainly go and do all of these same things. So if I'm talking about my left output, you'll see the UI is fairly similar here. I can scroll through here and I can choose what gets sent to the left output. If I go back, in fact, let's look at the same output that I'm using here. Let's look at the 3.5 millimeter output. That's going to be X1 and X2. Okay, so I actually do each of those on a separate screen. So this is just for the left, what's going to be sent out of the left side of the 3.5 millimeter output on the MixPre. And I would just choose here what gets selected, and I can do pre-fader or post-fader. So blue pre-fader, sorry, blue is post-fade, green is pre-fade in this particular case. So it's a little bit different here. So it's generally set up there. Now you can do that, but what I wasn't able to find here is, you'll notice if you go into the slate menu, you can turn the slate mic on or off. And you can route the tone, but I'm not sure whether this affects the slate, just the slate mic as well. So the top 3 rows are the tracks that get recorded, and the bottom 3, oh, those are the outputs. Okay, you can control it. So you control it here instead. So I can choose if I wanted to do what kind of the similar setup. Okay, so it's a little bit different on the MixPre here. If I wanted to, I could configure. I have to do it one by one though. I wish there was a quicker way to disable everything. But what I can do here is turn off all the ones that I don't want to receive the slate mic. And this is, I'll have to test to make sure this is both a slate mic and tone. Right now it just says tone, but I'll need to test that. But here's how I could do a similar type thing. If I just wanted to send that to the X1 and X2, that's the equivalent of the sub output on the F8N Pro is called the X1, X2 over here on the MixPre 10. So that's the idea on how to do that. And then of course I can pop back out here. And then when I do my tone, actually my slate mic's on right now. You can see slate mic is going to all those tracks right now. Let's come back in here. I can also put that on the switch here. So if I wanted to activate that, I could do that here. And it looks like it was not affecting it. So it only looks like that routing affects the tone and not the slate mic. The slate mic appears to go to every channel and every output. One advantage that the MixPre, or the Zoom F8N Pro, appears to have over the MixPre series, if I understand correctly. So, all right, let's go to the chat and see if we have any questions related to routing especially in that context. We'll come back. We're not done with routing yet. We also need to talk about headphones because all the same stuff applies to headphones. Take a sip of water while Danny's looking through the chat there. No questions about routing whatsoever? Okay. All right.
There are questions.
Let's go. Okay. Well, before we go to those questions, let's talk about routing headphones. So let's come back over to our overhead camera here. All right. I'm going to go into the menus again, this time again into the output menu. And this time I'm going to come into the headphone routing. And here I go. So this is exactly the same as before. This is what we where we choose what goes to our headphones. So, and you can choose different, you can see there are different headphone presets. This is setting number 1, and we can move between them if we want to and configure a variety of different headphone presets. But I might want to have a headphone preset where I'm just listening to the isolated channels. And again, I can do that pre-fader or post-fader. Or I can just, the default here, of course, is, I deselected that. So the default there is left goes to the left side of the headphones, and the right mix goes to the right side of the headphones. So that's the default there. But if I wanted to, for example, I was booming myself and mixing, here's where I might want to send the boom mic to my left ear, pre-fader, and the lav mics on 2, 3, and 4, let's say, to my right ear, and actually I will do those post-fader because I might be adjusting those throughout. And I might want to turn them down quickly if I need to really focus on the boom mic while I'm booming. It's really important to be able to have that feed of the boom mic while you're booming, of course, because you need to be able to make sure that you're angling and cueing the microphone effectively, making sure that you're really optimizing its position and really capturing the perspective of the sound that you're trying to capture. So I will say sometimes when I'm booming, I will also add the boom to the right ear as well, in addition to the post-fader feeds of the lavalier microphones. So something like that kind of setup right there is often what I'll do. The predominant thing in my ears needs to be the boom microphone, but then I need those lavalier microphones there just so I can make sure that there aren't any issues that I need to solve, like maybe a lot of clothing rustle, or maybe one of the batteries on the packs, the transmitter packs has run out, something like that. So that's what I need to keep track of there. Okay, that is our overview of routing. And let's go back out to the chat and see what questions we have, whether they're related to routing or not. 2 questions, okay. Let's go to our main cam there. Can you just choose channels in routing with a touchscreen on the MixPre? Good question. Let's try it. They're awfully small boxes, but let's give it a go. Let's go to outputs. Let's go to left output. Does not look like it. You do have to use the encoder to select those. They're just too small in that case. And it's not possible. So that answers that question. For Mark, I use a MixPre 3.2 for multiple outputs to headphones. Do you have a suggestion for output from that unit? Well, I guess it depends on what you're recording, Mark, and what the format of your recording is. If you have a lot of times it's just a mix, left and right mix is going to make sense. So for example, if you're doing a podcast and you've got 3, say, dynamic microphones plugged in, then in that case, a mix can be just fine. Or if you wanted the pre-fader isolated channels, you could do that as well. So either way works, but I guess it really depends on the context of what you're recording. If it were in a similar situation of this and I have a boom mic and then 2 lavalier mics or 2 wireless channels on 1, 2, and 3, I would probably, in my case, I would put the boom in the left ear. Actually, technically, I put the boom in my right ear and the lavs in my left ear. I can actually hear a little bit better in my right ear, and that's the reason I choose that, but whatever works for you. But I think it really depends on what you're recording there. So hopefully that makes sense. And if you have more context, we'd love to consider that as well. Okay, one more from Keith. I guess none of this applies to the MixPre 3.2. It certainly does. fact, let me just pull that out. I am going to power down the MixPre 10, and we're going to pull the battery pack from this and put it on the MixPre 3. It's funny when you have this setup, it's like the MixPre is this tiny recorder and you have these massive batteries hanging off the back. All right, let's come back over to the overhead camera here. We're just booting that up. Okay. So if I come in here, I have all of the same controls. So here I have this, it's called a stereo out on the MixPre 3 instead of the X1, X2. But all the same things apply right here. So if I want to, to my left output, I want to, just send channel number 1, I can do that. And then come back in and maybe to my right output, then I could send channels 2 and 3. I can certainly do that. So all of this, Keith, absolutely applies also to the MixPre 3. You just don't have as many different things to route to or to route from. But the routing definitely works the same. So I'm going to go ahead and send this back to my default. So my right output, I'm going to send the right mix. And my left output, I'm going to send the left mix. That's the default setting, FYI. So, and that's on the MixPre 3. So yes, definitely still applies to the MixPre 3, just like to any of the bigger recorders and mixers. All right, Mark, I was referring to an output from multiple headphones, say for the operator and the talent plus maybe a director. Okay, yeah, that's a good point. So here's the thing. Yes, I definitely would tune that in a little bit. Now the MixPre 3 only has a single stereo output, so you're not going to have as many options in your particular case. So that's, did I remember that right? Does Mark have a MixPre 3? Okay, MixPre 3. MixPre 3 too, okay. Yeah, so you only have that single stereo output, so you don't have as many options to break things up a little bit, but ideally, the talent should only hear one mic. So if you're miking them with a lavalier and a boom or some sort of podcast style mic or broadcast style mic, the trick there is that you probably only want them to hear one, because most likely the mics are going to be a little bit out of phase, and if you feed them both of them, it'll be a little disorienting for them. And actually listening to themselves talk can be a little bit tricky. So if you only want the talent to be able to hear, maybe what the director is speaking into another channel, then that's where you would set that up. But the problem is with the MixPre 3, you only have that one output. So you don't really have a lot of options there. You'd need to move up to one of the bigger recorders, like an F8N Pro, like the Pro level 8 series recorders from Sound Devices. Something that has more outputs where you could route different things to the different outputs. So in the case of a MixPre 3, you pretty much you could use a splitter and take that one 3.5 millimeter output and feed a mono feed via wireless, say, for example, to the talent on that one half, and then the other half would be for you for monitoring, I guess. Although, I guess presumably what you do on a MixPre 3 is the operator would be listening on the headphone output, so that would be your mix. And then the other output, the 3.5 millimeter output, you could split that, like I was talking about. So you could use a 3.5 millimeter splitter, send a mono feed via wireless to the operator, to the talent, and a separate mono feed to the director if you wanted to do that. So yes, that could definitely work. And so I would say in the talent's case, you probably would only want to feed to them what the director is saying. This gets a lot more complex, so I think we need a little bit more detail on what you're trying to accomplish there and all the details there. But if you have those, we can definitely walk through how you could go about setting that up. Okay, from Paul. Given poor quality of headphone amp on the Zoom F-Series, have you ever used some kind of external headphone amp with this device? Also, when I need to play back a recording to 2 to 3 people. You certainly could. You'll take up one of the outputs. So depending on which version of the Zoom F-Series you're using, you'd take up one of the outputs to attach a headphone amplifier, and that would be a great way to if you have a headphone amplifier you prefer, you could certainly use that. I want to say this from my perspective about the Zoom F-Series headphone amplifiers. They're not horrible, unusable. They're colored to me. They sound colored. They sound very high frequency boosted to me. So they weren't really very balanced in terms of their overall sound. Doesn't mean they're unusable. And in fact, in some cases, some people would argue that when you're doing production sound, you might want to have a little bit of that boost potentially, because those are where some of the problem frequencies are going to be. So if you've got problems, you will know and be able to identify those. But yes, you certainly could use one of your outputs depending on which Zoom recorder you're using. And also when you want to play it back to 2 to 3 people, that'd be a perfect use case for attaching a multi-output headphone amplifier. So yeah, good point, Paul.
Okay, we have some other questions from before.
Oh, wait, Danny's talking. Let's put you on your mic.
There are 2 or 3 other questions from before this topic.
Okay, we're going to check on what those other topics are, other questions are. From Marcus, I thought I'd return and add more info to what I discovered after a previous question about individual headphone mixes when recording multiple people. It was a personal mixer, such as the Behringer P16M, which has to be tied into a dedicated rack like the X32, and then data is sent over dedicated Ethernet called Ultranet for their brand name. Okay?
That's all there was.
Oh, okay. Very good. I apologize, Marcus, I don't remember the original question exactly, but if you've got a question you'd like us to address now, definitely just if you'd at Curtis Judd Audio, we'll be sure to pick that up and get more info, but thanks for sharing more context there. Okay, from Christopher, when and why did you get the Pearl 2? Why upgrade from the Pearl Nano when the Nano is arguably a more powerful box despite being the baby in the lineup, given its newer chips? So the Pearl 2 is on loan to me. It's not something I own. I haven't purchased one. They actually loaned it to me. Initially, we were going to try using it for my work in my day job at Webflow. But there was, in terms of bringing remote guests in, there's some things you have to do in terms of network configuration, and we weren't really set up to do that where we were operating it. So they sent it over to me, and I should have a review up on that either late tonight or tomorrow sometime, depending on when I get enough time to finish it. It's almost there. I just have a couple more clips of B-roll to record and then cut those in and finalize it. But the Pearl 2 for me is more of a, it's not the type of thing that I need for this live stream necessarily. The Nano is everything I need for this live stream. Again, I'm using an ATEM Mini Extreme as a switcher, and then the Pearl as the encoder. But yeah, once I'm done with the Pearl review, then that gets boxed up and shipped back to Epiphan Video. It's theirs, it's not mine. So hopefully that gives a little more context. I will be holding onto the Pearl Nano though. As an encoder, it has been far superior and far more reliable than the ATEM Mini, any of the ATEM Mini models for me, for reasons I can't explain and Blackmagic can't explain. They have tested my ATEM Mini Extreme. I actually sent it back to them in California, and they tested it and said, the encoder looks fine to us. Every time I try to stream to YouTube directly from any of my ATEM Mini models, Extreme ISO, ATEM Mini Pro ISO, ATEM Mini Pro, all 3 of those, what happens is it will start the stream and YouTube will receive it just fine, but then after about 30 seconds to a minute, the buffer on the ATEM says it's just fine, but YouTube is saying, hey, we're not getting enough data. And so it eventually just locks up and fails. And then the encoder locks up and the red LED starts flashing on it. So the Pearl, both Pearl 2, Pearl Nano software encoders, including Ecamm Live and OBS, all work fine on the exact same network through the exact same router and switches at my home here to YouTube without a problem. For whatever reason, ATEM's encoders don't work. I can't explain it. I don't know what the answer is to that, but that's some background information. So sorry, I took a diversion there. That's the background. Okay, Daniel says, how did you know it was time to move from a Sound Devices 633 to a Sound Devices 888? Well, ironically, I moved it around the time that production completely shut down in 2020. So for me, I don't know if it was a great time. I don't regret it. I mean, the 888 is a lot more flexible in terms of routing in particular. So for example, you can route the slate mic, you have multiple buses that you can route audio to. It's just a much more flexible device. On the downside, it does use battery more quickly than a 633. A 633 is a little bit more power efficient than the 888 is, so that's something to keep in mind. But these days I'm using the 888 on a small cart, so I have a huge battery down on the lower shelf. It acts as ballast for the cart, but also it'll power the 888 for hours and hours and hours. So that's what it works for me. But if you're asking yourself that question, actually Alan Quevedo was here a little earlier. Last I heard, he's still asking himself that question. He's on a 633 and wants to know if it makes sense to go to an 833 or an 888. And I don't think he had. Last I heard, Alan, if you're out there, I don't think you have moved. So it really just depends on what you're doing. If you find yourself in a situation where you're on a project and you can't do something you need to do and the 8 series will do it, that's probably a good time to do it. I would say this, if I'm doing a live, and there's a lot more live stuff going on these days, it seems like. If I'm mixing something live, I would much rather have an 8 series where I've got EQ, compression, noise assist, mix assist or Dugan auto mixing. That's when for me, well, you have Dugan auto mixing on the 633, but noise assist I think is only on the 8 series. So that would be a case where I think the 8 series starts to make more sense when you have those tools that you don't have in the 633. And another thing you can do, does this make a difference or not? I don't know. Depends on your individual situation. But the 8 series, those smaller inputs on the left are not just line inputs. They're actually preamplifiers as well. So that gives you a little bit more flexibility for bringing in more microphones without having to send it through another preamplifier before it comes into the 633. Or in this case, in the 8 series. So hopefully that makes sense. So there are a lot of little considerations. But mostly it's about flexibility and being able to do things that you can't do with the 6 series. Okay. Omid asks, what is your opinion about the MKH40 compared to MKH50 and MKH416? I'm not familiar with the 40, so I don't know I think the 40 is a cardioid microphone, if I'm not mistaken, but I can't really speak to that one. I've never used it. 416 and the 50 I've used. I will say this, the 50 is a classic and the 416 is a classic. Basically, the MKH50 is probably something that people would generally use more indoors, not strictly, but oftentimes it's not a shotgun style design. It is more of a pencil condenser microphone design. And it has, to me, what sounds like it's not an uncolored microphone. It definitely has a vibe to it. And that vibe works really well with certain voices. We use it in our studio at work. And there are certain voices in the studio presenters that it works really beautifully with. And other presenters where it starts to sound really harsh in some of the mid frequencies. And so it's a great microphone. Is it for every voice? No, not in my opinion. Same thing with the 416. The 416 does have a really nice broadcast sound to it, very rich low end, without being woolly or too woofy. And it's very good it has a narrower polar pattern on the front. I generally find that to be more useful outdoors when you've got it on a boom pole and you're cueing back and forth, and you really need to isolate the sound. It, though, tends to be fairly bright. Both of those I think were designed in the analog tape recording era, so I think they've voiced them specifically for recording to tape initially when digital came along and they redesigned those series. So they have the MKH 8000 series now, the 8050, which essentially is like a drastic upgrade of the MKH 50, and the 8060, I think it is kind of the rough replacement for the 416, voiced a little bit differently, both of those. I use the 8050 for most of when I'm booming in my work, and I really love the sound of that for digital. It's not as bright and sibilant on a lot of voices as the 50 and the 416 can be, the 416 in particular. So those are some of my thoughts on that, Omen. Hopefully that makes sense and provides a little context. Mark, for my earlier headphone question, I was just informed the Talent will not need headphones, but the splitter idea is a winner. Thanks, you bet. Good luck, and I hope that project goes well for you. Okay, we're good on questions for now. Let's jump over into, give me just a second here we had a couple questions that were submitted ahead of time. Let's go take a look at those. And actually, I am a little parched. Give me just a moment here to take a sip of water. Okay. First question is from Gavin. I have a MixPre 6.2, a GH5, GH5S, GH6, an S1, and a Ninja 5. Fortunately, we know what those are. That sounds like gobbledygook to someone who's not operated in the camera world, but I want to sync the timecode to the MixPre, I assume you mean from one of the cameras, and to the Ninja 5 without using an external device. Well, you have a couple of choices there, Gavin. The trick is if you've got that Ninja 5, this is where things get tricky. Danny has something to say. Let me enable your mic. 1 second.
So are some of those cameras and recorders and is the Ninja a monitor?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, so the GH5, GH5S, GH6, and S1 are cameras. The Ninja 5 is an HDMI recorder monitor. And of course, the MixPre is a sound recorder. Thank you for the clarification. So here's the trick. If you were not using the Ninja 5, the neat thing about the MixPre series, Danny, if you go to the main camera for just a moment here, I don't know if you can see this very well, but there is a little micro HDMI input. This is the MixPre 3 here, but the 6 and the 10 also have it. The 10 here, this is the 10 2, has a little micro HDMI input here as well. Again, there it is right there. What that allows you to do is send an HDMI cable from one of your Panasonic cameras there into the MixPre, and that sends the time code from the camera to the MixPre. And in fact, let me show you how to set that up to the overhead, if you would. We're going to boot up the MixPre 3 again. Okay, we just got that. By the way, there's a new firmware update. We're on 7.17 now. Okay, so if I go to the time code menu, pop in here, I would change then the time code to HDMI time code. Once I've attached that cable, the little clock here, would start counting up the same time code that you have on your camera. So that's the simplest way. The problem is you're also using a Ninja 5. So let's go back to the agenda view there. So that means you only have one HDMI output. You could use a powered HDMI splitter to send the HDMI from the camera into the Ninja 5 and from the other port on the splitter to the MixPre, and that would send timecode to both the Ninja and to the audio recorder. Now, the Atomos recorders usually have an HDMI input and output, but what I've found is that when you connect the camera's HDMI output to the Atomos's HDMI input, and then the Atomos's HDMI output to a MixPre, it doesn't pass through the timecode. Excuse me. So that you'll need to test that. Those things are always changing, and I haven't tested it recently, but last I checked, that was the case. So that's where you may need a powered HDMI splitter. And the problem is a powered HDMI splitter on your camera rig doesn't sound like a fun thing at all. It's heavy, it's probably bulky, and it needs some sort of power source. So there are passive splitters. I don't know if those will work or not. You'll be at, some of them work and some of them haven't worked. So I put up a video several years ago talking about this topic, and a lot of people left comments on their experience with different splitters. So if you want to do a search for Curtis Judd, Atomos, MixPre, you'll find that older video. You can see a lot of comments and different things different people have tried. So I'd actually recommend go take a look at that, Gavin, and see if you can find something that's going to work for you. So it's a tricky problem to solve. I don't know. I don't have a great solution for it. If you're doing all, if you're using the camera plus the Ninja plus the MixPre, it's a powered splitter is the only solution I've found so far. So, okay. Next question is from Ewan, I believe is how you pronounce that. I hope I got that right. I have a Rode wireless mic transmitter receiver and a couple of recorders, including a Zoom F6, MixPre 6.2, and a Zoom F3 on order. Is it possible to add a recorder between the remote microphone and the Rode transmitter? For example, connect the microphone to the recorder and the transmitter to the line out of the recorder. This would let me go back to a 32-bit version of the recording in post rather than being limited to a lower bit rate for the wireless microphone. I think there is a setting in the MixPre to reduce the level of the line out, but not sure if it's an appropriate use for that setting. So Ewan, yeah, that's absolutely an appropriate use for that. So if you wanted to do that, that would absolutely, that should absolutely work. It'd be a little bulky. And it sounds like you're using the wireless mainly just so that you don't have to run a wire from wherever the talent is back to your recorder. And that can be fine. So yeah, that should definitely work. And that's an absolutely appropriate way to use the output. In fact, what Sound Devices put that in there for, and actually Zoom has this as well. The only caveat I should give you is, let me come back to this in just a moment, but the Zoom F6 may have a limitation there. But the whole purpose of that auxiliary output, or sorry, not the auxiliary output, but the stereo out on the MixPre 3, for example, on the 6, is to send that audio to camera, or in your case, to a wireless transmitter that has a microphone level input. So absolutely drop that by, I'd probably start somewhere around minus 35 dB, and that should put you in a pretty good spot. So now back to the caveat with the Zoom F6. I wish Zoom would indicate this somehow on their product, but the initial copies of the Zoom F6 had a problem where if you did attenuate the output on the line output, it would get really, really noisy. And so instead of doing that, you needed to leave the output set to line level and instead purchase an attenuator cable. However, it looks like on the newer versions that people are not experiencing that, so it looks like Zoom made some sort of hardware change to the more recently manufactured copies of the Zoom F6. I wish they would indicate which you have in some way. As far as I know, they don't. So that's a little caveat on the Zoom F6. Just keep that in mind. All right, let's go to the chat. See what we've got going in the chat.
I think we have two similar comments, but I'm not sure.
Two potentially similar comments from the unmarketing group. For the timecode question, could you send timecode from the MixPre into the timecode input on the Panasonic cameras and the timecode from the camera over HDMI to go to the Ninja? Great question. I don't know how the S1 works. I only know how the GH5S works. And the way the GH5S works is that it's just a jam port. It doesn't actually continue sending timecode. So yes, you could do that initially. You'll jam sync it, but the problem is that the camera drifts pretty quickly. So the timecode at that point would just be useful for, would just get you in the ballpark, and you'd still have to fine tune every single audio clip to every single video clip and make sure they're lined up perfectly. So it's not a perfect solution. It is something if you just need something that's good enough to get you into the ballpark, as they say, and then fine tune it in post. But if you're going to go to the trouble of timecode, from my point of view, it makes sense to get it right. So you should be able to drop everything into your nonlinear editor, right click and choose sync all of these by timecode and move on. But just depends on your workflow.
I think this is saying the same thing.
Danny thinks this next one is the same thing. Paul, could Gavin sync timecoding cameras with each other and send HDMI signal from one camera to Ninja 5 and from different camera to the MixPre 3.2? Well, some of those cameras don't have a timecode jam sync feature. The GH5S does. I don't know if the GH6 does. The S1, I don't know whether it does. I think the S1 does, but I don't know of a practical way to do that, Paul. I like the thinking. I like the innovative thinking. But if anyone knows of a way to do that, I don't know of a way to do that. And again, you're going to run into the same problem where the cameras just they drift really quickly. They don't have proper temperature compensated crystal oscillators in them, so they do tend to drift fairly quickly.
Okay, you have some people saying thank you for answering.
All right, Keith. Keith says thanks. Thank you, Keith, for the question. Omid says thank you. You're absolutely welcome. Alan says, just something to consider, the Sound Devices HX3 headphone amp is awesome. I didn't even know Sound Devices made a headphone amp, Alan. So that's good to know. I'm just going to pop this open at sounddevices.com. Let's just take a look here on current products. Sorry for the movement here, people. HX3, there it is, portable headphone distribution amplifier. It looks like it's 3 channels. Really good to know. Thank you for that, Alan. So there's an option for you right there. And it looks like in terms of images, so you have line inputs or XLR line inputs, you have 1/4 inch, 3.5 millimeter. It actually gives you the pin out description right there. Here are the outputs on the other side, 3.5 millimeter, 1/4 inch, 1/4 inch, 1/4 inch. It looks like it could be powered via, that's a AA batteries. This is their old style of build, which is really, I think, kind of cool, kind of old school. But I assume that's where you put AA batteries in to power it for the field. Did it have any other sort of power input? Let's see. I'm just going through the images here. Oh yeah, there's a 5 to 17 volt DC input right there as well. So you can potentially power it if you have some sort of power source for your sound bag. Cool. It also gives you a peak indicator or a clipping indicator. And then spec-wise, that's the image there. Let's look at the specs. Of course, the frequency response, I list 10 to 50 kilohertz, plus or minus 1 dB. Okay, good. Output clipping levels plus 18 dBu. Input clipping levels plus 24. Okay, so yeah, it looks like, spec-wise, it looks like a really good option there. So thanks for that, Alan. All right. Let's see what else we've got there in the chat. From the Unmarketing group, Dante on the 888 is a clutch feature for our workflow. I absolutely agree. That's another thing for the question earlier about, from Daniel, I think it was, about going from a 633 to an 888 or a Scorpio. The Dante feature is super cool. Again, does everyone have that workflow where they need to have distributed Dante devices throughout a network and remote control of that and remote mixing and recording? Not necessarily, but if you do need that, that's where Dante is amazing. Really amazing feature. Synergy, your sound, your vision. I love the DPA 4017B. Me too. It's a good one. Good shotgun microphone. Small shotgun microphone. Mark says, I've used multiple tentacle syncs for the Ninja and MixPre and use their app to sync the audio with the video. A little bit more work and cost, but much more effective. I agree, Mark. Absolutely. The tentacle syncs are really nice to work with. Shoji, any announcements, audio, video, or lighting from NAB that have caught your attention? One thing caught my attention. Let's go back over to the Mac here. I haven't seen anything from audio, but for video, Blackmagic has a new set of switchers, and it's a kind of a head scratcher, to be honest. So they've taken their Constellation line there. They had one switcher before called the 8K Constellation, which was like a $10,000 switcher, which, you know, most of us are not going to be using something like that. But now they've brought them down. They have 3 models. They have the 1ME Constellation HD, the 2ME Constellation HD, and the 4ME. The ME stands for Mix Effects. So this one looks like a half, maybe a half rack, or no, maybe 3/4 rack. I don't know. And then a 1 or 2U and a 4U rack mount versions. But they made some interesting decisions about them. So they're HD instead of 4K, which, you know, for most live streams, that's going to be just fine. So I think they realize that a lot of people don't need 4K streaming. That's fine. They did put, and I haven't read enough yet, but they did put scalers on each of the SDI inputs. So I don't know if that's just converting from interlace to progressive, or if it does frame rate conversion as well, or if it does resolution scaling as well. That's not clear to me. I haven't read enough yet. I just heard about this morning. But in any case, these are kind of interesting. They're not, the thing is though, they're head scratchers from the standpoint that, like, let me just show you. Here are the back panels. You will notice something right away, and that is no HDMI inputs whatsoever. So for many of us that are doing a hobby or a side hustle type of stream, we're probably needing HDMI inputs, not SDI inputs. So this is really going to be for people that are working in bigger conferences and things like that where they need SDI in and out. And if you had to do cross converters for every single input, these would work, yes, but that would be kind of a pain to have a SDI to HDMI cross converter for each individual input, for each computer, for each camera. Just kind of funny. But it does also have some, it's nice that they have updated. They put the Fairlight mixer, which I actually love, from the A10 Mini, into each of these switchers as well. So they've also added MADI in and out, if I'm not mistaken. So a digital audio in and out. See, I would assume, here it is, MADI on SDI. Here's the MADI outputs. That's another topic for another day, but in any case, at least on the 4ME constellation, it has MADI. There's a MADI input here, and then MADI outputs there. So that would potentially allow you to send the audio to a proper mixing board and be able to work with it from there. They're 3G SDI inputs, so again, so I would assume that they don't convert from 4K or 8K down to HD. Again, not an issue for a lot of people, but just so that you're aware, they did make that choice. It does have a USB output, so you can use it just as a webcam if you're going to be streaming, for example, with OBS or any software encoder, or maybe with some of the cloud services like StreamYard or Restream or any of those. But it's kind of funny because these things are usually pretty noisy, so you wouldn't want it sitting on your desk. It's obviously in a rack mount format, at least the 2 and the 4. But these tend to have really loud fans in them. So to me, it's like, okay, so am I going to run a 40-foot USB cable from the closet where these are situated? You start running into problems with USB when you run long cables as well. So you'd have to have a repeater or something. So it's not really like the A10 Minis still make sense for most of us that are doing smaller time streams. But for those that are ready to move up to something bigger and they're going to start working on conferences and things like that, or bigger shows, then that's where these new ones make sense. So that's one thing I saw, Shoji. I haven't seen anything from Sound Devices yet or Zoom. Deity is evidently going to be announcing 3 new products. I'm not there, so I haven't heard if they've announced them yet. But they'll probably have those on the show floor, and we'll get some news on those here soon. Blackmagic also announced a new recorder, the HyperDeck Shuttle HD, which looks interesting. That's true. Let me pull that up here as well. I think it would be under here. Maybe not. Maybe under here. So here are their older switchers. And this is the one I have here, the ATEM 2 that I use sometimes. Where is the shuttle? They announced this just last week, I think it was. I assume it would be under capture and playback. In any case, yes, here it is, HyperDeck Shuttle HD. So it's an HD HyperDeck in a really small form factor that sort of fits the same form factor. It kind of sits next to an A10 Mini. So you have SD cards that you can put in the back and play back media, videos and such. And you've got this big shuttle dial here, or jog dial, if you will, along with all the playback controls. So that's kind of a cool little thing for those that need a HyperDeck that's a lot smaller. And I think it's a lot more affordable too. I can't remember the price on it now. But this one was interesting that didn't include H.265, just H.264. Does have HDMI in and out, Ethernet. Oh, also built-in teleprompter, which was kind of interesting. So kind of a neat feature there as well. But in terms of price, again, I apologize for all the motion here. $495 US is what it looks like. So kind of an interesting addition there as well. They also have some new higher end HyperDecks that they announced as well, of a 4K and an 8K, if that's your jam. All right. Christopher on FB, Sound Devices said they have no booth this year due to COVID-19 restrictions, so I doubt they'll announce anything. Okay, good to know. I didn't know they weren't going. Atomos is introducing capture to cloud like Blackmagic design. Okay, good. You may have answered this previously, not sure, but is there a good reason of upgrading from a MixPre 3 to a MixPre 3.2? Good question, Kevin. I would say, well, it depends. It really depends. So if you're using the MixPre on your desk as a live stream preamp and mixer, then I don't really see a benefit to the MixPre 3.2, really. If you're doing any sort of timecode workflow, the MixPre 3.2 is a lot more convenient because it does have an inbuilt temperature compensated crystal oscillator, that is to say a proper timecode clock in it, whereas the MixPre 3 does not. But you can connect an external timecode generator to the MixPre 3. The other thing, of course, is the 32-bit float audio. So if you're recording in a lot of situations where you can't stay on top of the gain, and this is recording, not live, that's where the 32-bit float can be helpful for you potentially as well. So those are the kind of the use cases where I would say it would make sense to go to the MixPre 3.2, but if I understand your use case, Kevin, where you're mostly using it as a preamplifier for your live shows and for recording your weekly videos, then I don't personally see a lot of value in upgrading to the MixPre 3.2.
Here's the last one.
Okay. Oh, last question. Oh my. From the Unmarketing group. Has Zoom made individual USB input channel routing more flexible as it is on the MixPre series? Ooh, that's a deeper question. Well, we can go to the overhead camera and take a look on the on the Zoom F8N Pro. Let's see, on the inputs, you can only do the physical XLR TRS combination inputs on the F8N Pro. So you cannot route USB to one of those inputs. So no, from that standpoint. On the output routing, let's see. There's not really a way to route that. Let's go look at the USB menu. If you go into audio interface, you just get multi-track. So not really. It looks like the short answer to your question is no. It doesn't look like they've added the same flexibility that the MixPre has as far as routing USB. And that's interesting. See, so the MixPre has the ability to do more sophisticated USB routing, but the F8N Pro at least has more sophisticated slate routing. So it's a trade-off, whatever's more important for your particular use case. Okay, everybody, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm glad that we got a chance to talk. Hope all of you are doing well out there. Get out there and make some great sound, and we'll talk to you again next week. Take care, everybody.